The Turkana sun burned mercilessly over the cracked earth. Janet wiped sweat from her brow as she adjusted her backpack, the red dust clinging to her boots. She had always been drawn to forgotten places, stories that had been buried beneath sand and silence. But Laroba village was different. No map carried its name anymore. Official records claimed it had never existed. And yet, old men sitting under acacia trees still whispered about it in trembling voices. The village vanished in one night, they said. No bodies, no footprints, just silence. Janet had been researching local folklore for her freelance journalism work when she first heard the name Laroba. At first, she thought it was just another fireside tale, like the stories of river spirits or desert jinn. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized this was something different. The government had sealed files about Laroba in 1983. Aid workers who had once passed near the area refused to talk. Even church records went blank for that year. And that was enough to make Janet pack her bags and board a rickety matatu headed north. Her fixer in Lodwar, a wiry Turkana man named Ebe, refused to accompany her beyond a certain point. There are places where the wind does not forgive, he warned, eyes fixed on the endless horizon. Laroba is one of them. Janet laughed nervously, though unease pricked at her heart. A village doesn't just vanish, she told herself. There has to be an explanation. But when she finally stood on the edge of the land that had once been Laroba, even she began to doubt her reason. The huts were there, circular, made of mud and sticks, but they were hollow, collapsed inward as though abandoned for decades. Clay pots lay shattered in the dust. Spears leaned against doorframes as if waiting to be taken up in defense. And yet there were no bones, no graves, no sign of departure. It was as though every man, woman, and child had simply dissolved into the desert air. Janet camped on the outskirts, determined to spend the night. As the sun bled into the horizon, shadows stretched long across the village ruins. The desert winds whispered through the huts, carrying with them sounds that could almost be mistaken for voices. Her recorder captured the silence, her notebook filled with descriptions, but Janet needed more. She found it the next morning, when she stumbled upon an old man sitting beneath a thorn tree a mile away from Laroba. His skin was creased like leather, his eyes cloudy but sharp with memory. "You shouldn't be here," he croaked when Janet introduced herself. "Why not?" she asked gently. He stared toward the village ruins. "Because they are still there." Janet frowned. "But there's nothing there, just empty huts." The elder shook his head. "Empty to your eyes, not to theirs. Laroba did not die, it was taken." "Taken by who?" The old man's gaze turned distant. "By the oath they broke." That evening, the elder, who finally gave his name as Locker, told Janet the story. Long ago, before the droughts and wars, Laroba had been a thriving village. The Turkana people there had made an oath with the desert spirits to never shed blood on sacred ground, to honor the river with yearly sacrifices of milk and song. But one night in 1983, during a severe famine, raiders came. Instead of leading them away from the sacred ground, Laroba's warriors fought at the heart of the village. Blood spilled into the dust where none was supposed to fall. And as Locker's voice grew softer, the wind howled around them, drowning his words. "That night," he whispered, "they drummed and sang to keep the spirits calm. But the ground shook, the sky split with light, and when the sun rose, Laroba was gone. Every soul, every child, every elder, gone without a trace." Janet felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but the conviction in Locker's voice made her hesitate. She asked, "Where did they go?" Locker looked at her, eyes glistening. "Some say they walked into the spirit world. Some say they are trapped in the hour before dawn, forever reliving their last night. All I know is, if you stay until midnight, you will hear them." Janet set her camera and audio recorder in the heart of the ruins. She wanted evidence, something solid. At first, nothing happened. The desert was silent except for the rasp of wind through dry grass. Her lantern flickered weakly. Then, as the clock on her watch struck midnight, the air changed. She heard its soft, distant drums. Faint singing in Turkana dialect, voices layered in haunting harmony. Goosebumps rose across her skin. The air grew heavy, pressing on her chest. In the corner of her eye, she thought she saw movement. A woman carrying a pot of water, a child running with a goat, a warrior sharpening his spear. But when she turned, there was nothing. The drums grew louder. The singing turned mournful. And suddenly, Janet wasn't alone. A figure stood before her. A young woman, dressed in traditional Turkana beads and skins, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "You are not of us," the woman said, her voice echoing. Janet staggered back, but her recorder was still running. "Who are you?" she whispered. The woman's expression twisted with sorrow. "We are Laroba, forgotten by men, trapped by oaths broken." Janet's throat went dry. "What do you want from me?" The woman stepped closer. "Remember us, tell our story, free us." And then, as quickly as she appeared, she dissolved into the desert air. The drums ceased. The night fell silent again. Shaken but determined, Janet left for Lodwar the next morning, her mind racing. If what she saw was real, she needed to prove it. At the Catholic Mission Archives, she begged access to missionary journals from the early 1980s. At first, the priest refused, muttering that some histories were better left untouched. But when Janet showed him her recordings, the faint echo of drums, he grew pale and handed her a box of old papers. Inside, she found the diaries of Father Miguel, a Spanish missionary who had lived near Laroba. His final entries in 1983 chilled her. "The villagers fear the curse. They say the oath is broken. Tonight they drum and sing to keep the desert from swallowing them. The sky is wrong. The stars are moving. I fear we will not see dawn." It was his last entry. Piecing together the diaries, Locker's words, and her own experience, Janet reconstructed what must have happened that night. The famine had weakened the people. Raiders attacked. Blood spilled on sacred ground. The villagers gathered in desperation, drumming and singing prayers into the night. And then came the light. Not fire, not lightning. Something else, something that split the sky open. The entire village had stepped into that light. Not willingly, but drawn, swallowed. Whether by the spirits of the desert or by something else, Janet couldn't say. But the fact remained. Laroba had not simply been abandoned. It had been erased. On her final night in Laroba, Janet stood again among the ruins. Midnight approached. The air thickened. This time, when the drums began, she didn't run. She called out into the night, "What must I do to free you?" 100 ghostly faces flickered in the darkness. Warriors, women, children. And from their voices came a single reply. "Remember us, tell the truth, let the world know." Tears blurred Janet's vision. She promised aloud, "I will." The drums faded. The ruins were silent once more. But for the first time, Janet didn't feel fear. She felt purpose. Months later, her article was published internationally. The day the village vanished without a trace, the mystery of Laroba, Turkana. The government denied it. Skeptics mocked it. But survivors, the grandchildren of those who had lived near Laroba, came forward with fragments of memory. Aid workers admitted they had been warned not to speak. And 1 year later, on the anniversary, travelers swore they heard drums in the Turkana desert at midnight. Janet herself returned that night. As the wind howled across the dunes, she heard the faint echo of children's laughter. The village might never return in body,